Luther just was one of those really, I think, we know him personally in some ways, an annoying overachiever. He was so convinced of the righteousness of God and God's holiness and his not holiness that Luther was just tormented by this. Things that don't maybe affect us the same way or we consider it that same way. This was real for Luther. And having the sense that he could never measure up to what God expected tormented him. So one day he was walking back home from the university to his parents' home, and the legend is there was a terrible thunderstorm, a bolt of lightning hit near him. He fell to the ground saying, "Saint Anne, protect me, I'll become a monk," which, we think, okay, keep your fingers crossed, do over once the lightning's gone. He meant that seriously, came back and gave up school and joined a monastery, became a monk. And there, I'm sure that he was not the favorite of all the brothers because of his incredible drive to get this right. In fact, one time his confessor said, just quit confessing all the time, just love God. And Luther said, love him, I hate him. And then there was a sense of Luther that for sure now everything was off. But it's this sense that if God expects perfection and human beings are sinful, how can I love a God who expects something that I'm not capable of? But his superiors kept giving him assignments, which was probably good to keep him busy. He became an Old Testament professor, and when reading through scriptures, he came upon, it took him a while, it wasn't a lightning bolt moment in the tower that we all hear in legend, but gradually he came to understand that the righteousness that God expects has already been given to us in Jesus Christ, that the death and resurrection of Jesus has imputed that righteousness upon us. And when Luther finally, when this sunk in, he realized he was free. He was free. In his day, not anymore, we're past this now, thank goodness, but in his day, the church, which in Western Europe was the Roman Catholic Church, had a whole system set up around penance. And there was a notion that you needed to confess your sins, and then, okay, you could get granted absolution, but then you also had to pay a penalty. So, for example, if I were driving a little faster than I ought, which I have done several times, the police officer will give me a ticket. I might say, I'm sorry, and he said, I forgive you, but here's the ticket. I still have to pay the penalty. And the idea was that, you could get that done in this lifetime, but if you died before that was finished, or if you racked up enough bad points, you're going to have to spend some time in purgatory, because, of course, in heaven, there's no place for sin. That's all purged from us. And the church came up with this elaborate understanding of purgatory as a place where people would be purged from their sins before they were eligible to go to heaven. And it made it sound worse than hell. And Luther, taking a look at this, said, well, what's the point of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ if we still have to work out what's left, the sin that's left on us that clings to us before we can go to heaven? So that's when he had a little argument with a local indulgence seller. In fact, oddly enough, here in our offices, we have an indulgence. Greatest fundraiser for the church ever invented. Sometimes a little sorry that we gave that up, looking at the way the economy is, and sometimes, but nevertheless. So you could buy these indulgences, and the thought was it's like paying a fine, and you would get time out of purgatory. And not only you, but you could do this for loved ones. Who wants a loved one to be languishing in horrible torture for centuries before being set free to go to heaven? So you could buy this indulgence for someone who was already dead. And then one day, we don't know, the word in English is posted, which can mean you either put up on a wall, post something, or you mail something. We don't know if he himself nailed these 95 theses or points of argument to the Castle Church in Wittenberg, or if he had a graduate student do it, since he was a professor now, or if he posted it, mailed it to his archbishop in Mainz. Nevertheless, common practice in those days, this was their idea of recreation, is that you would post these theses, and then in public you could debate them. So Luther did, and he said that it was not possible for one to do anything to earn one's salvation, including to buy an indulgence. This had already been granted by the death and resurrection of Jesus. We're set free. Well, At the same time was a marvelous, wonderful social media invention called the printing press, which might be the last time that Lutherans have been really effective at media, or with technology, but we're working on it now. And the printing press, they could make many copies of this. And so what would have been a local, small conversation in a backwater town in Germany in a very small university became a Western European phenomenon. So with the printing press, the discussion went much further than his own little bailiwick, caught the attention of officials in Rome and thinkers all over across Europe, and that started conversations back and forth, which led eventually to the Pope excommunicating Luther, and Luther then having to figure out what he's going to do now.